Have you ever considered that the most powerful words in existence might be hidden in plain sight? That the greatest spiritual secret wasn't buried in some distant temple, but concealed within the most ordinary human experience we all share? Sleep, our nightly surrender to the unknown, might be more than just rest. What if those moments before consciousness fades are actually a critical threshold, a gateway between worlds that the ancient Gnostics understood with profound clarity? We've been taught that dreams are merely the mind's way of processing information. But what if they are something far more significant, encounters with realms that the architects of our reality would prefer we never recognize or remember? The words that Jesus reportedly whispered to his closest disciples weren't meant for the temples or the crowds. They were intimate transmissions designed for the most vulnerable moment in human existence, when we cross the threshold between waking and sleeping. These words weren't preserved to comfort the masses, but to liberate the few who could truly hear them. What you're about to discover isn't just knowledge, it's a key that has been waiting for you to remember how to use it. The Nag Hammadi Library, discovered in 1945 in the Egyptian desert, revealed texts that had been systematically erased from official Christian doctrine. Among these forbidden gospels were instructions so powerful that the early church fathers deemed them dangerous enough to burn. The Gospel of Philip, the Apocryphon of John, and fragments of unknown texts speak of secret words, passwords of sorts, that Jesus taught his disciples to use at the moment of death, and significantly at the threshold of sleep. These weren't prayers in the conventional sense. They were sonic keys, vibrational combinations that the Gnostics believed could bypass the archons, those cosmic jailers who maintained the prison of material existence. The Pistis Sophia, another recovered text, describes how the soul must navigate past these guardians to return to the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality. But what's truly remarkable is that this journey wasn't just for the afterlife. It was a nightly practice, a rehearsal for the final liberation. The words themselves carry power, not in their literal translation, but in their resonance. How they vibrate through the chambers of consciousness as you stand at the gateway between worlds. They are not meant to be understood by the rational mind, but experienced as keys that unlock doors the archons would prefer remain sealed. If you find yourself drawn to these ancient mysteries, if something within you recognizes a truth beyond the veil of conventional wisdom, then you are among those who still carry the spark of remembrance. This channel exists as a sanctuary for those who sense there's more to existence than the material world permits us to see. Join us on this journey by subscribing, not as a mere digital connection, but as a declaration that you are awake enough to seek what lies beyond. When you subscribe, you're not following content. You're joining a lineage of seekers that stretches back to those first disciples who dared to receive knowledge too powerful for the world to contain. In the Gnostic cosmology, our universe exists as a flawed creation, not the work of the true God, but of the demiurge, a lesser deity born of cosmic error. This demiurge, ignorant of the realms above, believed himself to be the only God and created the physical world as a reflection of his own imperfection. To maintain this creation, he fashioned the archons, cosmic administrators who ensure that divine sparks, human souls, remain trapped in material existence, forgetting their true origin. The archons aren't demons in the conventional sense, but rather guardians of thresholds, maintainers of boundaries. They exist at every level of reality, where consciousness might escape its material prison, including the gateway of sleep. In the hypostasis of the archons, they're described as rulers of darkness who cannot bear the light of true gnosis. They patrol the borders between waking consciousness and the deeper realms where the soul might remember its divine origin. Sophia, divine wisdom, plays a crucial role in this cosmic drama. Her fall from the pleroma created the conditions for our world's existence, but also planted within it the seeds of its transcendence. In her compassion, she ensured that knowledge of the way home would always be available to those ready to receive it. This is why the Gnostics revered Jesus not as a savior through sacrifice, but as a messenger carrying the secret codes needed to bypass the archonic barriers. The archons maintain their power primarily through ignorance and forgetting. Each night as we sleep, our consciousness naturally begins to rise toward its source, a movement the archons must prevent. They do this by creating dreams that reinforce our identification with the material world, or by ensuring we forget the higher knowledge we might encounter in deeper sleep states. The threshold between waking and sleeping is where their influence is both strongest and most vulnerable. What makes the two words Jesus transmitted so powerful is that they function as a kind of sonic key that the archons cannot process or intercept. They resonate at a frequency that comes directly from the pleroma, the fullness of divine reality beyond the demiurge's creation. When properly intoned at the threshold of sleep, they create a vibration that temporarily disables the archonic influence, allowing consciousness to remember its true nature and origin. This isn't merely ancient mythology. It's a precise description of the architecture of consciousness encoded in symbolic language, because direct description would be intercepted and distorted. The archons aren't distant entities. They're the very thought patterns and perceptual filters that maintain our sense of separation from divine reality. And the practice Jesus taught wasn't esoteric ritual, but practical technology for navigating beyond their influence. What if the archons described in these ancient texts aren't external entities at all, but aspects of our own consciousness that have been programmed to limit our perception? Consider how your own thoughts police the boundaries of what you believe possible. These thought patterns, these internal authorities that instantly reject anything beyond their programming, function exactly as the Gnostics described the archons, as guardians preventing the recognition of larger truths. The demiurge, in this psychological interpretation, becomes the ego self, that which believes itself to be the center of existence, unaware of the greater consciousness from which it emerged. It creates a world in its image, populated by thought forms, archons, that maintain its authority by rejecting any information that would reveal its limited nature. The ego isn't evil. It's simply ignorant of its origin, like the demiurge who declared, "I am God and there is no other." Sleep, then, represents a daily opportunity for liberation because the ego's grip naturally loosens as consciousness shifts states. In hypnagogia, that fluid state between waking and sleeping, the rigid boundaries maintained by the ego archons begin to dissolve. This is precisely why ancient wisdom traditions across cultures placed such importance on the moment of falling asleep, developing practices to maintain awareness through this transition. The two words Jesus taught weren't magical incantations, but precise vibrational tools that, when properly understood, create a state of consciousness the archonic patterns cannot penetrate or redirect. They function by momentarily suspending the habitual thought patterns that automatically categorize and limit experience. In that suspension, something else can be perceived, what the Gnostics called gnosis, direct knowing beyond conceptual understanding. This explains why these words cannot simply be written down and read. Their power isn't in their literal meaning, but in how they're experienced. They must be received in a state of receptive awareness, not intellectual curiosity. The words themselves are less important than the shift in consciousness they facilitate when properly understood and applied. They don't work as a formula, but as a key that only functions when used with the right quality of attention. What's truly revolutionary about this Gnostic understanding is how it reframes our entire experience of reality. If the archons are patterns within consciousness itself, then liberation doesn't require escape from the world, but a fundamental shift in how we perceive it. The divine spark isn't somewhere else. It's the very awareness reading these words, temporarily identified with limited patterns of thought and perception. The prison isn't the material world, it's the forgetting of what we are. And the liberation Jesus offered wasn't about escaping creation, but remembering how to see it through unconditioned awareness. The words he transmitted serve as a pattern interrupt, momentarily suspending the archonic thought structures long enough for unconditioned consciousness to recognize itself. If this perspective resonates with something deeper than your thinking mind, if you sense a recognition beyond intellectual agreement, honor that resonance. That feeling of recognition is itself a form of remembering, a moment when the divine spark within you recognizes its own light reflected. Every such moment of recognition weakens the archonic patterns that maintain forgetting. Share this recognition with others who might be ready to remember. The simple act of acknowledging this deeper truth, even through something as simple as a like or share, creates ripples in the collective field of consciousness. Each ripple weakens the consensus reality that keeps the archonic patterns in place. Your recognition becomes a beacon that helps others find their way to remembrance. How many nights have you fallen asleep without awareness, surrendering consciousness to whatever dreams or influences might come? How many mornings have you awakened feeling that something important happened during sleep, only to find it slipping away like water through your fingers? This common human experience points to the threshold the Gnostics understood so precisely. The practice of using these transmitted words isn't about escaping reality, but about removing the filters that prevent you from experiencing it fully. Consider how differently you might perceive your life if you could remember each morning the expanded awareness you touch in the deepest states of sleep. What if the anxiety, fear, and limitation you feel are simply symptoms of forgetting who you truly are? The archonic influence manifests in our lives as the voice of doubt, the inner critic, the fear of judgment, the belief in scarcity, all the thought patterns that contract consciousness rather than allowing it to expand. Notice how these influences strengthen when you consider possibilities beyond conventional understanding. That resistance itself is the sensation of archonic patterns attempting to maintain their boundaries. This understanding transforms how we approach sleep. Rather than a passive surrender of consciousness, sleep becomes a daily opportunity for liberation, a practice ground for the ultimate liberation at death. By approaching the sleep threshold with awareness and the proper vibrational keys, you gradually weaken the patterns that maintain forgetting. Each night becomes a journey beyond the archonic boundaries, each morning an opportunity to bring back more remembrance. The practice is deceptively simple, yet profound in its effects. As you lie down to sleep, bring full awareness to that hypnagogic threshold where consciousness begins to shift states. In that liminal space, with intention but without effort, allow the transmitted words to arise, not as concepts to be understood, but as vibrations to be experienced. The specific pronunciation matters less than the quality of awareness with which they're approached. What makes this practice so powerful is its daily repetition. Each night, the boundaries become more permeable. Each morning, more remembrance remains. Over time, the rigid distinctions between waking and sleeping, between self and other, between human and divine begin to dissolve. This isn't about escaping the world, but experiencing it as it truly is. Not a prison to escape, but a field of consciousness to be recognized. The Gospel of Thomas records Jesus saying, "The kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father." This isn't poetic metaphor, but precise instruction. The recognition that dissolves the archonic boundaries is the recognition of your own nature as both human and divine. The words Jesus transmitted create a bridge between these seemingly separate realms, allowing consciousness to remember itself across all states of being. They work not by fighting against the archons, but by resonating at a frequency they cannot distort or intercept. The frequency of unconditioned awareness, recognizing itself. What the Gnostic teachings reveal is that the divine spark and the material world are not separate realities, but different aspects of the same consciousness. The pleroma, fullness, and the kenoma, emptiness, exist simultaneously, separated only by the archonic boundaries of perception. The words Jesus transmitted don't transport you somewhere else. They remove the veils that prevent you from seeing what's already here. This understanding integrates all aspects of human experience. The mythic cosmology of Gnostic texts becomes a precise map of consciousness itself. The philosophical distinction between illusion and reality becomes a practical recognition available in each moment. The human experience of limitation and suffering becomes the very ground from which liberation emerges. The archons aren't enemies to be defeated, but aspects of consciousness to be integrated and transcended. The demiurge isn't an evil god, but the creative principle operating without awareness of its source. Even the material world isn't a prison to escape, but a field of possibilities once perceived through unconditioned awareness. The words Jesus transmitted serve as a key that unlocks this integrated perception. When properly understood and applied at the threshold of sleep, they temporarily suspend the boundaries between states of consciousness, allowing the divine spark to remember its nature beyond all divisions. This remembrance gradually transforms how you experience all aspects of life, not just sleep and dreams. What's most remarkable about this practice is its simplicity and accessibility. It doesn't require years of study or special abilities, only the willingness to approach sleep with awareness and to work with the transmitted words as vibrational keys rather than intellectual concepts. The practice meets you exactly where you are and works with whatever level of consciousness you bring to it. Perhaps what we've been seeking was never hidden in esoteric doctrines or distant mysteries. Perhaps the gateway to liberation has always been as close as our nightly surrender to sleep. What if the words Jesus whispered to his disciples weren't meant to create a new religion, but to offer a practical key for remembering what we've always been? The archons maintain their influence through complexity and confusion, creating systems of thought so labyrinthine that the simple truth becomes obscured. But the practice Jesus taught cuts through all complexity with elegant simplicity. At the threshold of sleep, remember who you are. The words themselves are simply tools to facilitate that remembrance. The most profound truth is often the simplest, not easy, but simple. You are not just a human having occasional spiritual experiences. You are consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing itself as human. The forgetting of this truth isn't a sin or failure. It's part of the experience consciousness chose to have. And the remembering isn't an achievement, but a return to what was never actually lost. What word or phrase emerges from the depths of your being when you contemplate this threshold between forgetting and remembering? Share it below as a beacon for others walking this path. Type, "I remember," if something within you recognizes the truth beyond words, not as a comment, but as a declaration that the divine spark within you acknowledges itself, even if just for a moment. Your remembrance strengthens the field of